It is never a dull moment in the NBA, man. Just less than 24 hours after that shocking Luka Doncic trade, which I have more thoughts on that trade now that I've had some time to let the whole thing simmer for a day. And I was going to share more on that trade and was putting together a video on it when, of course, I got my Shams bomb where we learn of another blockbuster trade. Not as blockbuster as the Luka one, but big trade nonetheless, where De'Aaron Fox is on his way to what was reportedly his preferred destination to the San Antonio Spurs, but also Zach Lavine from my Chicago Bulls to the Kings, while the Bulls get their 2025 pick back from the Spurs that was top 10 protected, a pick owed to them as part of the DeMar DeRozan sign-and trade back in 2021. While the Kings got 3 first-round picks, although one of those is kind of a fake pick, which I'll talk about. And of course, player for salary filler purposes being exchanged in the deal. A lot of moving parts, and I wanted to give my quick reaction to all of this, as these trades, in addition to the trade where we saw from Luka heading to the Lakers, having huge implications on some of the future trades to come as we head closer and closer to the NBA trade deadline. Now, unlike the Luka Doncic trade, which was so wildly out there and unbelievable that people thought Shams had been hacked, including myself, while De'Aaron Fox getting shipped to the Spurs and Lavine to the Kings is a pretty big deal, especially Fox going to San Antonio, a star player in the peak of his prime being traded from the franchise that drafted him, it also isn't that surprising, considering the Bulls, for one, have been shopping Zach Lavine for over 2 years now, and after they traded Caruso and DeMar over the offseason, the writing was on the wall that the Bulls were heading down a path of rebuilding. It wasn't a matter of if Zach Lavine was going to be traded, but when. And then for Fox, I mean, if reports hadn't come out last week that the Kings had suddenly made him available and that it was likely they were going to be moving on from him prior to the deadline, and had we not gotten that tweet, Fox getting traded now, yeah, that would have been a shock, but we were all kind of waiting for it to happen at this point. However, I did not think it would come so easy to the Spurs and what they had to give up in order to land Fox. Now, I know some will say, well, what do you mean? They had to give up 4 first-round picks between what they sent to the Kings and the Bulls and 3 second-round picks to land Fox. Well, not exactly, because the pick they sent to the Bulls, like I mentioned, was the Bulls' own 2025 pick, which was top 10 protected, meaning the Spurs were only getting that pick if it fell outside of the top 10, which, if the season had ended today, and is most likely where the Bulls are going to fall in the current standings with the teams ahead and below them, that pick had a 97% chance of staying with the Bulls. If the Sixers pass the Bulls in the standings, which I think is likely, then that becomes a 99.5% chance the Bulls keep that pick. So safe to say the Spurs weren't getting that pick anyway. Now, the pick would have gone on to be top 8 protected in 2026, which fine, that's a valuable asset, but the Bulls, given their current direction, would have had a decent chance of keeping that pick, and then in 27, it would convey as a second rounder. And then the 2025 pick the Kings are getting from Charlotte, that's a lottery protected pick. And we all know the Hornets are not making the playoffs this year, and that pick will convey to a second rounder in 2026. The 27 pick, that's their own, and then the Timberwolves 2031 pick, those are valuable, especially that Timberwolves pick, considering it's so far out into the future that it could end up being a high pick depending on where the Wolves are as a franchise by then. So I don't really look at this as a massive haul the Spurs had to give up in order to get De'Aaron Fox, especially when you consider the Nets got 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges, who isn't on the same level in terms of the caliber of player Fox is. Now, according to Clutch Sports, Fox believes he is that missing piece and perfect complement to be alongside Victor Wembanyama. Now, all that remains to be seen, and I don't know if I would call it a perfect fit, but Fox and Wemby together is going to be a scary duo for years to come. You're talking about one of the better point guards in the league, an elite level scorer, but also a high level passer that is great in the pick and roll. To put him next to one of the best defensive players, if not the best defensive player in the league, a generational talent, a superstar in Wembanyama, yeah, that's a team to be looking out for. I mean, we already saw just how great old man Chris Paul has been for Wemby's development. When you give Wemby a serviceable point guard, imagine pairing him with now an all-star point guard in De'Aaron Fox. So yes, in short, I love this trade for the Spurs because now they have a strong enough core, even with just these two. They can now continue to build around and start contending in the immediate term. Now, as far as the other two teams being the Kings and of course Chicago Bulls, while they're not horrible trades, I'm not really a fan of these moves for either team, and I'll start with the Kings. I'm sure a lot of people didn't watch the Bulls all that much last season. I don't blame you. But if you're a sicko like me who watched all 82 games and all the games in which Zach and DeMar played together during their past 3 seasons, you saw that without a very competent point guard, That duo did not work well together and underachieved as teammates. Now, I know it's a different roster, different circumstances, so it's not a complete like-for-like comparison, but when I saw that the Kings were getting Zach Lavine, I thought, all right, are they moving on from DeMar DeRozan as well? Because there's no way they saw these guys and how they played together last 3 seasons and said, yeah, we can make this work. And what's funny is you're giving them a non-defensive, slow-footed center who can't space the floor in Domantas Sabonis, just like what the Bulls had with Nikola Vucevic. I mean, the parallels here between these two teams is actually pretty striking. So while yes, I like that the Kings got a fair amount of draft capital, yes, they got a player who is having an all-star caliber season and should have been selected as an all-star to help them actually try and compete now. Well, part of the reason Zach had been doing so well was because he was in a free-flow moving offense that was catered around his play with DeMar DeRozan no longer being there. So yes, I get the Kings had to do something, especially if it was trending in the direction that Fox was not wanting to sign there long-term, but I don't like the fit with Zach Lavine in Sacramento, especially when the Kings no longer have a starting level point guard. If they move DeMar in a subsequent trade, okay, maybe this looks a little better, but yeah, I don't see how this moves the needle at all for the Kings, who are currently 500 and sitting 10th in the Western Conference. And now, as for my Bulls, the Chicago Bulls, sometimes I question why I love this team so much, and have been a diehard fan since the Dynasty days because this franchise just never seems to get anything right. Well, I'm glad the Bulls got their pick back so they no longer have to worry about teetering on this line of keeping their pick or potentially losing it. And it's also very critical that they now have control of their pick in 2026 so they don't have to worry about the same exact thing next season. That is important and a small win. But at the end of the day, the Bulls got their own pick back that they traded away, correcting their own mistake in the first place. But also, they had to give up a second-round pick and had to take on 2 bad contracts in that of Zach Collins and Kevin Huerter, who are not expiring deals, by the way, for a player who has been one of the most efficient scorers in the game of basketball this season. Now, yes, the other way you could look at it is, well, over the offseason and last season, Zach's contract was considered to be a negative asset. And if you wanted to move him, you were going to have to attach picks to get off of his max deal. And so walking away with keeping your pick and getting off his contract while saving some money in return, yeah, should be a good thing. But that was over the offseason. When Zach was coming off a bad season and a season in which he barely played because he was injured, that made sense. Now, though, he's the old Zach Lavine, who is an elite scorer at all 3 levels and is in his prime. And all you could manage was getting your own pick back that wasn't even likely to convey in the first place. I mean, Arturas Karnisovas, the Bulls EVP, has to be thanking Nico Harrison right now for making any GM look good in the NBA. Otherwise, this would be viewed as a pretty big blunder. The only thing I'll say is, a lot of how we judge this trade is very much dependent on what else the Bulls do over the next few days and whether or not, of course, this leads to the Bulls getting lucky in the lottery and landing a top pick in the 2025 draft. But as of right now, yeah, I don't love this trade, especially when Huerter and Zach Collins are both going to be making $18 million next season. Trey Jones, who's on an expiring contract, that's whatever. The Bulls aren't going to need to re-sign him, but you still got 2 bad contracts on your books for next season. I'm sure the Bulls will try and flip them, but they're not going to get much of value in return for them, that's for sure. So no, I don't like this trade for the Bulls, although it had to be done, that they needed to move on and pick a direction. I don't like the trade for the Kings because we already saw this experiment fail in Chicago, but I do like this trade for the Spurs, who are now well ahead of schedule in their rebuild. But I would love to know what you guys think, though. You let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.